So let's find out what kind of Prime Minister you really want to be. You've come out as a big supporter of drivers, talking about the war on motorists. Now, we've had a look at some of the people who are fighting what you call that war. One of them is in Cornwall, where the council is proposing a speed limit of 20 miles an hour, the kind you say is anti-British. But they're a Conservative council. Are they fighting a war against motorists?
And when it comes to this point around driving, you know, what occurred to me as I was going around the country talking to people, that there just seemed to be this sense that lots of people wanted to stop making life easy for people to use their cars.
We've had a close look at what's happening in Wales, and it's very similar to what this Conservative council in Cornwall is proposing. And also, even in your own part of the world, in North Yorkshire, there are, I think, more than 100 parish councils who want to have a 20-mile-an-hour limit. So if you think it's the wrong thing, as you've explained, will you stop Conservative councils bringing in these plans?
Yeah, this is about local people being in the driving seat, and it's about making sure that things are not imposed on local communities without their consent. Now, of course, it makes sense to have speed limits around, for example, school areas. Everyone wants safety for our children.
But what you have said is if local communities and local councils who are democratically elected want to do it, they can do it. And that is an important point, because I think some of this in the last few days, people might think, you know, your love for motorists seems to have come to you in the Conservative Party quite recently. You know, it was a Conservative government that told cities all over the country to bring in clean air zones, which was tough for the drivers of older vehicles. It was a Conservative mayor who first introduced and announced the low emission zone in London. Conservative councils have been introducing 20-mile-an-hour zones. And, you know, a sceptic might just wonder if your newfound passion for this agenda comes from the fact that you've been in the doldrums in the polls for a long time, and yet you hung on in Uxbridge, in the London suburb, by campaigning against the low emission zone that your party put forward as a plan. That's what's happening here, isn't it?
I guess the bit that you failed to mention, Laura, that when I was Chancellor, I cut fuel duty by a record amount. So
as previous Chancellors did before you. We are sitting in Salford, right next to Manchester. Yes or no? Will HS2, high-speed rail, come to this part of the world?
There's already spades in the ground on HS2, and we're getting on with delivering it.
That's not my question. Yes or no, is it coming here?
I'm not going to comment on all this speculation. We've got a project, we've got spades in the ground, and we're getting on with it. But it's right to focus on levelling up. Because
can I just stop you there? You were the Prime Minister of this country. This is not asking you about speculation. You're not a columnist. You're not a backbencher with an axe to grind. You're not someone from the rail industry. You are the Prime Minister of this country. This is your decision. Is this going to happen or not?
As I said, we've got spades in the ground. I'm not going to comment on further speculation. But what I can...
But you say there again you are committed to long-term decisions, and yet you are visibly refusing to make a long-term decision at this stage about HS2. You've even got it branded on your slogan at the conference, long-term decisions for a brighter future, and yet you won't tell people the decision on HS2. You've got a big group of Tory MPs rattling your cage demanding tax cuts. You've even got Michael Gove, your close colleague this morning, saying there should be tax cuts before the general election. With your changes of heart, have you really got your party under control?
So, look, with Richard, as you said, I think he was trying to stand as a Conservative candidate, but, you know, he talked about net zero. He talked about making sure that we're prioritising working people. That's the decision I've made.
But my question is the impact of spooking people by changing your mind.
No. I'm sorry. Yes, change may be uncomfortable for people. People may be critical of it, but I believe I'm doing the right thing for the country. I'm not going to shy away from that. If I believe the right thing to do is to chart a new course to net zero that will save ordinary families £5,000, £10,000, £15,000, £20,000, I'm going to do it. The best tax cut that I can deliver for the British people right now is to halve inflation. Mm-hmm. Inflation is a tax. You just said it isn't. Inflation is a tax. It's a tax that impacts the poorest people the most. And that is why the best tax cut that I can deliver is to halve inflation.
Your close colleague, Michael Gove, this morning has said that you should commit to cutting taxes for working people before the next election. Will you make that commitment?
Now, as I said, the best tax cut that we can give working people is to halve inflation.
So you won't make that commitment right now?
I'm a Conservative. I want to cut taxes. Yeah. But people saw very clearly... You asked me about making changes. Change may be difficult, but I believe the country wants change, and I'm going to do things differently to bring about that change.
Who voted for the programme you're now putting forward?
Well, look, I'm here putting forward a programme that I believe is right for the country. When I got this job, it wasn't the easiest of circumstances, as you alluded to in your opening, and my first priority was bring immediate relief to people.
You know, this time last year, we asked Liz Truss who had voted for her programme, which of course imploded. And the answer then was, I think, around 80,000 Tory party members. You didn't go through a leadership contest. So no one factually voted for the changes that you are now making. And I just wonder if are you relaxed about that?
Yeah, because I'm doing what I believe is right. I did that last summer. I stood up for my principles. I said what I thought was right for the country, and that was that fighting inflation was a priority, and you can't borrow your way out of doing that. I stuck to my guns, and I'm always going to do what I believe is right for the country, and that's what I'm doing now.
So much of the 2019 manifesto that you stood on has just disappeared. You know, you're wobbling on HS2, you've changed the net zero targets, the long-term plan for social care is not happening. Your health secretary admitted to us a few weeks ago that 40 new hospitals aren't all going to be new hospitals after all. You know, your allies are saying now people are going to see the real Rishi Sunak in this second phase. But is the real Rishi Sunak someone who's willing to chuck much of the 2019 manifesto over the side when you've been behind in the polls?
Laura, you're saying things that are just not true, saying we chuck net zero targets, but that's just not true.
No, I said
we're committed to our net zero targets. We haven't shifted them. They remain exactly the same. They're legislated for. How we get there is always a matter of government policy. The targets are the same. It's wrong to suggest that the targets have been changed. They haven't. It's wrong to suggest that they've been watered down. They haven't. They're set in law.
But the dates of how you get there have shifted.
But there are lots. There are over 100 different policies to help us get to net zero. They weren't all in the 2019 manifesto. The government constantly has a programme of figuring out what the right way to get there is. I've charted a different way to get to the same destination. I believe that what I'm doing is right for the British people, whether it's a new course on net zero, which will save them money, whether it's putting in place legislation that will enable us to stop the boats, because it should be the British people that decide who comes to our country and not criminal gangs. These are the types of decisions that I'm going to put in place because I believe they're right.
And we're hearing loud and clear that you might keep changing things. There might be more to come if you think that's the right thing, even though they're not things that the public voted for at the last election.
Look, I have a good sense of what the British people's priorities are.